Every morning at precisely 7 o'clock, the man sets up his easel on the sun-creased sidewalk of Collins Street, just beside the steps of the old post office. He wears the same charcoal coat, the same threadbare scarf, and the same expression, calm, watchful, somewhere between detached and intimate. His presence has become part of the street's rhythm, like the tram bells or the smell of espresso drifting from nearby cafes. He paints not on request, but on instinct. Strangers walking by often stop, some out of curiosity, others compelled by something they can't explain. When they approach, they find he's already painting their portrait, as if he's been watching them long before they arrived. The portraits are uncanny. Realistic, yes, but touched with something more, a rawness, a vulnerability, as if the canvas has stripped away their practiced smiles and revealed what lies beneath. One woman weeps without knowing why. A suited businessman thanks him quietly and walks away pale. A teenager stares at her likeness, where her eyes carry a tiredness she didn't realize she wore. No one knows the painter's name. He never signs his work. He gives each finished portrait away, carefully handing it to the subject like a gift or a confession. Around the neighborhood, he's known only as the man on Collins. Some think he's a ghost of the street. Some fallen artist who lost everything and paints now to stay alive. Others believe he's a savant, a prophet, a man with a mind wired differently. But no one really knows. He speaks very little. Occasionally, he hums not songs, but shapes of sound, like the strokes of a brush made audible. He lives just around the corner, above a second-hand bookstore that rarely opens. The landlord leaves his rent in an envelope. It is always paid. In his studio apartment, sketches cover the walls, faces of people who never came back to collect their portraits. He burns some in the fireplace each night, not out of anger, but necessity. Too much sadness, too many emotions, too many faces whispering their secrets from the canvas. His routine is simple, ritualistic. Coffee from the same cafe, charcoal and oil from the same old shop near Swanston. And then, he waits. Not for customers, but for the moment. The one face that breaks through the crowd like a smudge of color on a gray page. On the surface, he's just another figure in the city's background. But to those who meet his gaze, sit for his brush, and walk away holding their truth, he is unforgettable. Because he doesn't paint who you are. He paints who you are when no one is watching. Ivy Tran first noticed the man on Collins Street during a rushed walk to class, late again for her life drawing elective. Something about the stillness of his figure, the way the crowd seemed to ripple around him instead of through him, made her pause. She stood at a distance that first morning, hidden behind the cafe window across the road, sketchbook in hand. While the city throbbed with motion, he was a fixed point, composed, unreadable, yet attentive to every face. She watched him paint a mother and child, capturing in 30 silent minutes a softness that photography could never touch. Ivy began returning daily, always early, always quiet. At first, she sketched him. Then she sketched what he sketched until she realized her drawings, though technically accurate, lacked whatever invisible thread tied his subjects to his canvas. One Tuesday, moved by frustration and wonder, she crossed the street. "Why do you never ask for payment?" she asked. He glanced up only briefly. "Some faces are more valuable than coins," he replied. From that moment, a rhythm began between them. She sat beside him in silence, day after day, sketching in her pad while he painted on canvas. He never gave her a lesson, but she learned how to watch without judgment, how to listen without words. She noticed how he looked at people, not just the surface, but something beneath, behind, within. He once painted a woman in a crisp navy suit. The result? A portrait where the shoulders slumped slightly, the eyes held an unspoken plea. That woman, upon seeing the image, smiled faintly and said, "That's exactly how I used to look, before I lost my sister." Ivy asked him how he knew. He just shrugged. As days passed, she began to catch fleeting expressions in people too, a flash of grief behind laughter, a hesitation before a smile. She asked if he'd teach her how to see like that. "You already do," he murmured. "But seeing is only half the truth." Knowing what not to look away from, that's the other. He never told her his name, she never asked. But Ivy felt something shifting in herself, her lines more honest, her pages more raw. For the first time since art school began, she didn't draw to impress or pass. She drew to understand, to witness. And though he rarely spoke, she felt his quiet approval when he paused behind her, nodded once, and went back to painting. What she didn't yet know was that he had already painted her. Twice. The painter never returned to Collins Street. The wooden stool remained empty. Ivy waited every morning beneath the old post office clock tower, sketchbook in hand, her eyes scanning the crowd for that familiar coat, that stillness. But he was gone. A week later, unable to stand the silence, she climbed the narrow stairwell above the second-hand bookstore. The door to his flat was unlocked. Inside, the room smelled of turpentine, time, and quiet sorrow. The walls were lined with unfinished portraits, raw, haunting, honest. Ivy stepped deeper inside. The kettle still sat on the stove, his coat hung by the door. In the center of the room, on the easel, sat her portrait. It wasn't the sketch he had once made, it was something more. Full color, layered in oil. It showed Ivy, older than she was now, seated in his place, brush in hand. Her face was calm, but carrying something heavy. Behind her, Collins Street blurred into abstraction, just light, shape, memory. She stared at her painted self and felt tears rise without understanding why. Pinned beneath the corner of the canvas was a note, written in his narrow hand. "The last one is yours. Paint what you need to understand." She sat down in his chair and looked around at the room. She could feel the weight he had carried, not just the sadness he saw, but the cost of seeing. Her fingers found the brushes on the desk, worn and stained. She took one. That night, Ivy returned to Collins Street. She unfolded the easel, set up the stool. The sky above was turning lavender. People passed, slowing slightly. Some stopped. A few whispered. One woman placed a hand over her mouth. Ivy looked up, unsure. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "You're his student, aren't you?" Ivy gave the gentlest smile. "I'm here," she said. "I'm listening." And she dipped her brush in paint. The gallery was small, tucked behind a tram stop and a bakery that always smelled of sugar and smoke. Ivy named it Collins Light, after the street that had quietly shaped her life. The opening night was modest friends from university, passers-by who remembered the painter, and strangers drawn by something they couldn't quite name, but word spread. The heart of the exhibit was the room she'd found hidden in his apartment walls, lined with unclaimed portraits, preserved in delicate glass frames. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, each face captured in a moment of truth, the tremble behind a smile, the silence before a tear. The gallery was quiet as people walked through. No one spoke. Some stopped in front of their own faces. Others stood before strangers who looked eerily familiar, like versions of themselves they hadn't met yet. In the far corner, Ivy hung his last canvas, her portrait. Beneath it, a brass plate engraved with his name, Leo Archer. It was the first time the world saw it. A letter sat beside the plaque, handwritten by Ivy. He saw what most people are afraid to look at: grief, solitude, hope quietly burning beneath pain. He painted not what we wanted to be, but what we needed to accept. He showed us that being seen is sometimes the bravest thing of all. Every week, Ivy returned to the same spot on Collins Street. She painted only a few faces, not everyone. Only the ones that reached her in that same wordless way. She didn't paint to fix or to flatter. She painted to reveal, to honor. One afternoon, a child sat across from her, legs swinging, face full of questions. "Did you learn to paint like him?" the child asked. "No," Ivy smiled, "but I learned to look." And in the reflection of a nearby cafe window, Leo's image lingered for just a breath, coat fluttering, eyes kind. And then he was gone. But the light remained.